Black in Latin America by Henry Louis Gates, Jr., with annotated commentaries and criticisms.
It's market day in Dajabon, here on the Massacre River, which separates Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The border hasn't opened yet, but hundreds of Haitians try to beat the clock to set up their stalls first, over here on the Dominican side. Finally, it's 8 a.m., official opening time. The ancestors of the Haitians and the Dominicans have shared the island of Hispaniola for 5 centuries. This was the first place in the New World to import Africans as slaves. The island is the birthplace of the black experience in the Americas. But standing here on the Dominican side of the border, the differences between the two countries couldn't be clearer.
It's 8 o'clock on market day on this side of the river. It's 7 o'clock over there. They speak Spanish on this side of the river. They speak Creole over there. The people on this side of the river are proud to be part of a mixed-race society. There, they're proud to be black.
While this is true to explain the national identity of the nations, there are sizable populations of Dominicans that identify as black, and of Haitians that identify as mixed. In fact, there are also white-identified populations in both countries as well. We must understand that this is a simplification of the Dominican and Haitian experience.
Oh, I'm Haitian. I'm born in Haiti, born and raised, of parents born and raised in Haiti also. And myself is Peter Frisch, such a name. It's of German origin because my grandfather came from Germany. And I'm part of the French-Haitian community in Haiti. But I have my Haitian roots as well, going back all the way to independent time and colonial time.
In one particular case, the Polish immigrant group mixed completely with the black populace, making a distinct ethnic group within the country. Others have stayed more to their ethnic roots, only marrying within their own ethnic groups, such as the Jewish Haitians and many of the Middle Eastern Haitians.
Haitians and Dominicans have had many conflicts over the years. This river was the site of one of the worst massacres in the history of the Caribbean.
And I'm here to discover how all this came about.
I've come to Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic, the oldest European city in the New World, the first in the Americas to import African slaves. Every Sunday evening, people come to the heart of the old city to dance merengue. The roots of merengue are as mixed as the people. It is the symbol of the Dominican Republic. Frank Cruz has been singing merengue for 67 years.
Merengue has changed a little. It is played faster now. Before, you could put your arm around a girl if you were in love. You would embrace her and dance closely together. Now, one is over here, the other over there.
The Dominican people are a rainbow of blacks and tans and browns.
What is it about Dominican Republic that created the conditions for merengue to be born here?
Merengue is a mixture of the music of the African slaves, the Spanish with their guitar, and the guira, which is Dominican. They mixed up their instruments to make a typical Dominican merengue.
Sí, señor.
Es nuestra música.
It's our music. We feel it is ours.
La vida de nosotros.
This is our life. Without merengue, we can't live.
Merengue is the life, the soul of the people.
Santo Domingo feels unmistakably Spanish. Founded in 1496 by Christopher Columbus's older brother Bartholomew, the city was the first seat of Spanish colonial rule in all of the Americas. Dominicans are especially proud of that Spanish heritage. In Columbus Square, opposite the first cathedral in the Americas, sits a monument to the man who first colonized this island. Christopher Columbus certainly has pride of place here in the heart of Santo Domingo. And it says something about the country's sense of itself. Spanish, Catholic, and if not exactly white, then most certainly not black either. I'm curious why there are no statues of famous black heroes here, even though 90% of the Dominicans are Afro-descendants.
This is where I start diverging with Dr. Gates. Dr. Gates sees a mixed identity as a negation of his own identity as a black man. That is because he is of mixed ancestry, yet raised in a one-dropist society. But in the Dominican Republic, where the majority identify as mulatto, Indio, or mixed, there is still a recognition of African and native ancestry. While the governmental structure is definitely European-based, the food and culture has strong African and native influences. If there was no recognition for said ancestry, statues of Africans would not exist in the Dominican Republic. Heroes are individuals we remember and immortalize, but to remember them, they have to have been recorded as a part of a chronicled history. Dominicans today have no say as to what the Spanish recorded in the past. During Spanish rule, the documented people would have only been Spanish descent people, or Africans or natives in the circumstances of rebellion against the colony. As mixing occurred earlier on, the heroes of Dominican history would have been either white in the beginning and mixed as time went on, but in the cases of Africans and that of black identified Dominicans that were recorded by the Spanish in the past and by Dominicans later on, they have been immortalized as well.
How do Dominicans see their African heritage, their blackness? Juan Rodriguez, an anthropologist, works for the Ministry of Culture as its Director of Cultural Diversity.
How would people describe you, given your beautiful mahogany color?
Well, here I am as Indio.
Indio.
I'm supposed to be Indio here.
Help me to understand, as an American, I'd never heard of this phrase, Indio. Where does it come from?
Well, by the 19th century, we didn't have any native indigenous people.
No.
Like in South America, so it didn't apply to us. But it was a way to use the word Indio to actually negate our African ancestry and then became something else.
This claim is championed by a black empowerment movement in the Dominican Republic that has been largely imported from the U.S. by returning Dominicans influenced by African American culture. This claim is not really accurate. While pure natives no longer existed, the native identity survived in the mestizo population. The vast majority of Spanish men took native wives and, therefore, the Hispanic population, even before the arrival of Africans, already had an indigenous mestizo undercurrent. consider current as part of their identity. Indio color was a term applied early in the Dominican Republic not as a claim of pure indigenous identity but to describe a skin tone similar to that of Native Americans. Much like mahogany was used by Dr. Gates to describe skin color. In the present, there also has been a movement to identify as indigenous, or Indio, to tie Dominicans to the land. While they have foreign ancestry, it is their indigenous roots that will always make them natives to the land. Furthermore, as Haiti took on a black identity since Dessalines, even with white and mixed populations over there, the sense of being mixed, for some, or of being Indio, tied to the land, for others became an identity of contraposition and contrast to the Haitian black one. This Indio identity is no different than that of many indigenous descent people of mixed ancestry in the U.S. that look black, white or mixed, but prefer to identify with an indigenous population as their primary identity.
Okay, my name is George Estevez. I come from the Dominican Republic and I work here at the National Museum of the American Indian, where I'm the workshops coordinator, and I'm also a Taino researcher. Well, basically, in the Dominican Republic, they just passed a law. Actually, it was a proposed legislation which actually passed into law, where they eradicated the term Indian color from the Dominican, from all official Dominican documents. And it's a bit controversial. For one thing, the term Indian color was always one that was wrong, in the sense that Indians don't have a particular color. But that was the only thing that was left to us as far as any kind of Indian identity. Being the Dominican Republic, that we're a mixture of all three races of the Spanish, the African, and the Indian. That was the only thing that was left, since the Taino people were declared extinct a long time ago, which of course, it's false. So they proposed this law and they passed it. But what they did was, when they passed it, is that they decided to drop the whole Indian term and they only leave us with two options, basically. It's to say you could only say that you're Spanish, or rather white, or black, or a mixture of the two. Now this poses a big problem. For example, if you are of Native American descent, that option is no longer clear to you. To confuse matters even worse, there are over 60,000 Chinese people on the island. They would have to either put down white or black as well. So you see, it's a very limiting term. I feel that they should have put all the options and let people decide for themselves. The problem that we have in the Dominican Republic is that people are always trying to choose for you what you are. A lot of times someone from the outside will say, well, all Dominicans are black because look at Sammy Sosa. But Sammy Sosa is not a representative for all Dominican people. I cannot say that all Dominicans look Indian, or all Dominicans look black, or all Dominicans look white. We look like everything. There's all kinds of them. So I feel that instead of leaving us these two categories, they should have put, white, black, Indian, mestizo, mulatto, Asian, etc., and then let people decide for themselves what their comfort level is how they identify. Well, the myth of extinction is one that arises, first of all, from a person's point of view. In this case, the historians. I think that if you're looking for a pure Taino today, if that is a real standard, then there are no Tainos, because Taino people are mixed. But by that same logic, then there are no Africans and no white people in the Caribbean either, because everybody in the Caribbean is basically mixed. The myth of extinction basically began due to several things. First of all, the Taino people did not have the immunity to the diseases that came with the Spanish, and so a lot of people did die off. But one thing that needs to be understood is that the only people that were really dying were the ones that were living around the Spanish centers, the Spanish towns. The Spanish never controlled any one island in its entirety. So therefore, there was always mountain hiding places where a lot of Tainos hid, and that's very well documented. Another thing that did off the Taino is the census records. The census takers until 1750 had a very particular way of taking census counts. Basically, someone would get in the middle of a town and they would spread their arms out and they would count how many houses were in that expanse, and then more or less guesstimate, and then they would do this like in a circle. So the Spanish could not possibly count people that were hiding from them. For example, how many illegal Dominicans are living in Puerto Rico? Nobody knows. These people are hiding in plain sight, so nobody could really count them. The same thing happens with how many illegal Mexicans are living here, or how many illegal Haitians are living in the Dominican Republic. These people hide in plain sight. So therefore, the Taino are basically doing the same thing. Well, DNA is a very interesting topic. For one thing, people that have been identifying with Taino identity were identifying with before DNA was even imaginable. So DNA was not a question, was not an answer that we were seeking for. It was something that just fell out of the sky. When people started investigating the mitochondrial DNA of the people of the Caribbean, then it was really high numbers, like 61% in Puerto Rico. And I just read a study that was done by a group from Japan. Two of the researchers were Tajima and Hamaguchi, who did a study, and they found that up to 51% of the people in the Dominican Republic also had mitochondrial DNA that's indigenous.
The study George is referring to is this one. Genetic background of people in the Dominican Republic with or without obese type 2 diabetes revealed by mitochondrial DNA polymorphism. Let's look at the abstract. Here are the key points for our video. Phylogenetic analysis of 198 mitochondrial lineages including Native Americans, Africans, and Europeans enabled us to assess relative genetic contributions of the three ancestral fractions to the two groups in the Dominican Republic. In the obese type 2 diabetes group, the majority, 64.0%, of the mtDNA lineages were from African ancestry, whereas the Native American fraction was predominant, 51.5%, in the healthy group, with both showing smallest amounts, 14.0% and 9.1%, respectively, of European contribution. This difference in maternal genetic background between the two groups was similarly demonstrated by phylogenetic analysis at the population level based on net nucleotide diversities between populations. The genetics was clearly demonstrating that Dominicans did indeed have Native American ancestry, not just European and African ancestry, as was being claimed.
Now, that said, mitochondrial DNA has its plus and its minuses. For one thing, mitochondrial DNA is something that's only passed down from the mother to her daughters, and from the mother to her daughters and her male children, but only the females could pass this along the line. So you could literally have mitochondrial DNA, but have very little Indian blood, because it takes a lot of people to make up, like where every individual has, within 5 generations, has up to 64 descendants, ancestors. So what happens is that could kind of blur the lines. But one thing that's important to me is that if, in fact, when they throw these terms extinction, when speaking about the Taino, if in fact the Taino became extinct, which is basically the destruction of a genome, or the disappearance of a genome, then these things shouldn't be there. So autosomal DNA shows us that on average, Dominicans and Puerto Ricans have anywhere between 10 to 15% genetic makeup that's indigenous, and this is done through autosomal DNA testing. However, those are basically statistical averages. When individuals, as particular in Cuba and the Dominican Republic, you find concentrations of people of Taino descent, and there people range 40, 50, 60, and it's a lot higher. Again, DNA to me has nothing to do with culture. I just think that in a place like the larger islands of the Caribbean, where you find so much indigenous culture, the DNA definitely reinforces what we've already been. Sort of like affirmation. An affirmation.
Because when you look at Dominicans, we cannot say honestly that we are Anglo-Saxon. If you look around, look at me. I am black.
You are black. Did you feel this way, Juan, when you were growing up, or did you have to learn that you were black?
Actually, and I am sad to say, I had to learn to be black.
How did you learn?
Well, I went to New York as most Dominican, and all of a sudden I felt that my roots were in Africa, not in Spain like here. Even today, everybody said the motherland here is Spain.
As stated before, this claim is championed by Dominicans returning from places like New York with African-American ideas of culture and identity. It is quite telling that he states that they are not Anglo-Saxons or English instead of Spanish, which shows where the influence of his mentality came from. Notice that he also states that Dominicans claim Spain as the motherland, yet he also claims they are Indio. What he is forgetting to mention is that Dominicans claim Spain, the native Indio, as well as the African roots. Some parts of the Dominican Republic have more Spanish roots, others more African, and some areas have heavy native roots. We also see parts that identify with a more European and African element or mulatto, or also African and native element or Sambo.
So who's black in Dominican society? In America, all these people would be black. But here, who's black?
Well,
Negro. Who's the Negro?
I think nobody's Negro here. If we are told you are black, oh no, I'm not black, I am something else. Dominicans are in complete denial of who they are.
That is a disingenuous claim, considering Dominicans are taught since childhood that they have three roots: African, Spanish and Taino. And there is a famous Dominican saying negro tras las orejas, or black behind the ears, which insinuates that most Dominicans have some black or African ancestry. They just don't identify solely by one racial concept. The majority prefers a national identity of Dominican. It is only when push comes to shove that they will state mixed, mulatto, or Indio to tie themselves to the land. They identify with all their roots, but their true identity is just Dominican. Furthermore, there are Dominican populations that clearly identify as black, especially the Cocolos and the Afro-Americanos. In fact, 11% of the population identifies as black.
Look at this. For Dominicans, this represents African heritage, sambos. This is nothing but sambos. So that explains why people, the way they portray Africans, why a kid would not say, I am African, because that's what they give you, that's what they show you.
Another disingenuous claim aimed at American audiences, which reflects the speaker's American education. Sambo is only offensive in the U.S. culture, which used the term much like Picanini and Mammy, but the original Spanish term referred to people of African and indigenous descent. Nor are these artifacts, which are quite innocent, the only images that Dominicans are exposed to visualize their African heritage.
Los laberintos de este museo que encierran tanta riqueza cultural, donde se unen el negro, el indio y el español, en esta mezcla que dio origen a los dominicanos.
In the United States, most Dominicans would be considered black. But here many call themselves Indio, a term unique in the Caribbean, covering many gradations of brown.
Dr. Gates claims that this situation is unique in the region, but as you will see, not only in the Caribbean, but in the rest of Latin America, Afro-Indigenous descent populations exist that identify as Native American in some form or another.
Aqui agora eu vou explicar para vocês aonde que está o desmatamento em torno da terra indígena Pataxó, daqui de Barra Velha. Já fica o sul do parque, é Curumbauzinho, Águas Belas e Craveiro. E aqui a Aldeia Nova, que fica, já fica também na direção do sul do parque, que é da terra indígena, que é o município de Prada. E então aqui eu morro, mas eu não saio daqui da minha terra. Então é isso que eu quero falar para vocês, né? E vão ver também o reflorestamento. O reflorestamento para nós aqui é muito principal, é muito bom, não só para nós, que é para todo mundo, porque a natureza, ela faz parte da nossa vida. Nós sem a natureza, nós não temos uma vida boa, uma vida digna, nós não temos saúde, nós não temos educação, nós não temos nada. Isso é como faz o índio e também não índio também. Então é todo mundo hoje, é governo brasileiro, outros países, envolver no reflorestamento. O que tem é conservar, zelar, e onde não tem é replantar. Ele está escrito a terra dos Pataxó, aqui nele está escrito a terra dos Pataxó. Eu quando canto essa cantiga, me dói muito no coração aquela energia do meu antepassados que sofreu, morreu na luta, derramou seu sangue. Teve uma causa que não era justa, quando esse povo chegou, matou nossos parentes, estruparam nossos parentes. Então, na verdade, eles têm uma indenização, danos morais, porque naquilo que eles fizeram com nossos anciões. Eu sou um índio Pataxó, tenho 48 anos. Quando entrei na luta com idade de 18, hoje eu tenho 48 anos, mas eu não estou esmurecido não. Se meu destino é morrer na luta, eu tenho o prazer de morrer na luta, mas eu vou à luta, eu vou à frente na luta, não vou esmorecer não.
Deep in the heart of the Nicaraguan jungle, an indigenous community in peril. They're Mosquito Indians, once a society of warriors that helped the British fight Spanish conquerors 3 centuries ago. These days, they're the ones asking for help.
The river is going up as never before. All our crops are underwater. Before we had a drought, and before that, the Felix hurricane. Since then we had to start feeding our family with this. We are desperate.
Climate change is having a devastating effect here. Mosquito Indians subsist on food they grow or gather and hunt from the jungle and rivers. But an unstable climate has made weather patterns unpredictable and basic survival more difficult.
We
ask the world, the United Nations, to help us to tell our government that we need to go somewhere else. We cannot live here anymore.
Aid agencies say that at least $50 billion a year is needed to help communities like the Mosquito adapt to climate change. These people hope that such suggestions soon translate to action and that their calls for help don't go unheeded much longer. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Huaspan, Nicaragua.
The stunning island of Dominica sits between Guadeloupe and Martinique, midway along the eastern Caribbean archipelago. The Caribbean itself is named after the Caribbeans who lived here before Christopher Columbus arrived in the Americas. Since then, their numbers have dwindled to almost zero in much of the region because of years of brutal treatment from the Spanish, French and British. But in Dominica, hope remains. In the early 20th century, when only about 500 Caribs were left, a 3,700-acre territory was established for them on the island's east coast, and now they number around 3,000. Tuna Orte is one of 8 villages in the territory, and it's a place where visitors are able to witness traditional Carib practices in action. I went there to meet their tribal chief, Irvince August, a man keen to continue the revival of his people's culture and traditions.
The project is based at reviving culture and living it. So what we are doing is educating the persons in the community at different forums as to the past, the children in particular. Today, like everybody else, the Caribbean people have moved on. We have moved on. We're in the modern world. However, we are building this consciousness among ourselves though, that yeah, we have to be mainstream, but then something must remain with us. We are of different culture, we are of different background, and so it is important that we maintain that part of it.
Not far from Tuna Orte is the Carib Model Village. Opened in 2006, it too aims to show visitors how the Carib or Kalinago people of Dominica used to live.
It is very important for us to keep these traditions alive because we tend to find that our people migrate to different areas, and the little that are left behind, we would not want it to fade away. So in order to keep the culture and the traditions alive, we try to pass it on to younger people as they grow up.
So what kind of effect does tourism have on Carib culture? Vince is in no doubt.
It was probably 20-something years ago. I got flagged for it when I said that, yes, we should open our doors to tourism. As a young leader then, some persons felt I wasn't saying the right thing. I think they've had their words back now, because it is still the right thing. Tourism has helped the Caribbean people to maintain their traditions and their culture. So it is just, it has evolved in the sense of persons getting excited about being able to do things that they would have normally done. They would have probably gone to the US, or they would have gone to the neighboring islands to look for jobs. Now they can stay here and profit from what they themselves are the product of. So it's good.
Thank you very much. Now, the motto for the Carib people here is revive and live, and it's hoped by keeping traditions such as this alive that they'll be able to do just that. Thank you.
My grandfather actually was Carib, but I never knew that until I became a grown man.
My grandmother is a descendant of the Carib. I am a Carib.
Oh, and right through, you can see it.
I'm a Carib.
A large forehead, a square face.
Were any of the Carib wars fought around here? Do you know anything about Carib history?
I know nothing about that.
We don't come to take the language because we didn't have no book of it. We had no one to teach us. Right. We have no one to teach us.
Do you know any of the language?
I don't know. I am proud to be a Carib, and I would be glad to know that my kids could grow up in school knowing that they have the Carib language.
Don't forget your culture. If you lose your culture, you lose your identity. If you lose your identity, you don't know where to go.
Various DNA tests have been done on the Garifuna, both in St. Vincent and in the diaspora in Central America. The British took the darkest populations of Caribs and forcefully migrated them to the mainland. As a result, as DNA tests show, the Caribs on St. Vincent have heavier native ancestry but remained under British control and lost their culture. In contrast, the Garifuna who went to the mainland have much more African ancestry in their DNA, but their Carib culture, language and identity is much stronger.
People just automatically think I'm black. I mean, they say it, they're like, oh, but you look black. I'm like, okay, yeah. But it's more to it. It's more to who I am.
On a Sunday afternoon last spring, several hundred people, mostly of Honduran descent, gathered in a school auditorium in the Bronx for the Miss Garifuna beauty pageant.
The girls, they wear the outfits that the women from the Garifuna village used to wear. When they perform, they're picking dances the Garifuna people used to do in Honduras. They're sugar-coated, they're not adding anything modern to it, it's just the culture.
The Garifunas are part African, part Caribbean, and part Central American. They descend from the native Arawaks of the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, and also from a group of West African slaves who landed there in 1797. In recent decades, many have immigrated to New York City.
New York is the largest Garifuna community outside of Central America. There are guesstimates that there are 200,000 Garifunas in all the 5 boroughs.
But when it comes to being counted in the census, the Garifunas say they don't fit into any box. Increasingly, there is a disconnect between how different ethnic and racial groups identify and how the census wants to count them. In the 2010 census, more than 18 million Latinos rejected the standard race categories, instead picking the catch-all known as some other race. Many argue, like 22-year-old Dilma Suazo, that they are so racially mixed that they constitute their own race.
Yeah, okay, good. Garifuna, To me, it's who I am. It's my culture. It's my language. It's my food. It's literally my family.
In the lead up to the 2010 census, Dilma and others in her family selected other race and wrote in Garifuna.
Everybody did it. My aunt did it. My mom did it. So hopefully, maybe in the long run, maybe in a couple of years, it will be that box that would say Garifuna. We no longer have to check other and have to write in Garifuna.
Who's the cook?
Ooh, everybody.
Dilma's family gathered at her grandmother's apartment in East New York, Brooklyn for traditional dinner, dancing, and conversation.
Usually, like if I had to check off a box, I would put as my race or how I would identify myself as Latina. I would never put Garifuna or other, check other, until currently I put other now, but I didn't know if it was valid, if Garifuna was valid to put, like if they would understand where that came from.
You see diversity with Asians and Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. You grow up looking at their culture, and then you realize, okay, that's their culture. But what about mine?
Oh, if you want to go colored-wise, sure, I can say I'm black. Do you want to go language-wise? Sure, I can say I'm Hispanic.
Technically, it's brown skin, but
I mean, yeah, seriously. So that way, now you're here, and we're like, okay, you got all these other check stuff, and so we called it. He's like, you know what? We're gonna go to other and just put Garifuna.
The Census Bureau acknowledges there's a problem with the questions of race and ethnicity. In 2010, they tested different wording in the forms, and last year they held focus groups with a report expected this summer.
Quoting the words of Umalali Niunagu, a Garifuna. Our ancestors are African, Carib, and Arawak, and yes, the African influence is present in our culture and our physical appearance, but we are not Africans, we are Garifuna. My race is Garifuna, from St. Vincent, not Africa, nor does anybody in my family consider themselves an African, we are Gari Nagu. We speak Garifuna, not African, and Garifuna is basically an Amerindian language. In Belize we are considered an indigenous group. We are known also as the Black Caribs. Who are the Caribs? They are Indian. The black comes from the African factor that our skin comes out black. There may be Gari Nagu out there that consider themselves African, but I haven't encountered that person yet. And if that is the case, hey, we Gari Nagu should forget our language and start speaking in Swahili, stop dancing punta, and throw our culture away, forget our name, and call ourselves African just to make everyone else happy. You ask me where the Gari Nagu were before 1635. They were in St. Vincent as the Red Caribs. The Africans came and mixed with the original Garifuna, making us. The Carib and Arawak element can be seen in the musical styles of the Abi Mahani and Aru Mahani, which are sung a cappella. Another Amerindian factor is our language. Our language is basically Arawak. The Garifuna language has been extensively studied by linguists, and is basically of the South American Arawak family, with numerous words taken from the Carib family, also from South America. It has also borrowed heavily from French, English, and Spanish. No more than 5 possible loan words from African languages have ever been found, and these are not confirmed. The language, as well as most of the technology, much of the religious ritual, and the agricultural and fishing complex, derives not from Africa, but from South America. I know and acknowledge the African in me and the African influence in my culture, but I also acknowledge the Carib and Arawak. Like James Lovell, a famous Garifuna singer, said, when someone says I am a Garifuna, they know and recognize that they have Carib, Arawak, and West African blood running through their veins. Of course, the African is present in the way we look, even though the indigenous is present in many Gari Nagu. It is in our music and our dance, the raga, which are stories, as well as the Anansi stories with call and response songs. For the 9-night wake, Baleria, and our religion is a mix of both, with a heavy African influence. But the Garifuna was in St. Vincent before the Africans came. I asked my uncle if we were Africans, and he said, we are Arawak and Caribs that mixed with Africans, but that we don't come from Africa. We are Caribs, and there were never Caribs in Africa. The Africans that came to St. Vincent were not Garifuna. Our flag has the colors yellow, white and black, which means the following. Yellow equals the color of our ancestors. White equals the peace that in which our people live. Black equals the color of our people. In other words, the African factor. Calling ourselves just Africans, in my view, is just forgetting something my ancestors gave their lives for. for, which is us having the right to know we are Caribs too. Garifuna is separate from all other races. Being black doesn't magically make you a Garifuna. You have to be a Carib and have the African factor too. I recommend the book Sojourners of the Caribbean by Nancy Gonzalez. This explains this matter in great depth. Sermaine. End of quote. Now, I know many will say this is just crazy Latin America and the Caribbean, but this is not true. We have seen this experience in the USA as well. Dr. Gates should look in his own backyard. It still occurs to this day.
Our children and our great-grandchildren will always have a place to call their home, their land.
There are tears and joy as the Shinnecock Indians celebrate becoming a federally recognized Native American tribe.
We are just elated that after this 30-year odyssey to establish who we are as a people was finally qualified.
The phone call from the Bureau of Indian Affairs came just after 11 Tuesday morning, accepting the tribe's application, making the Shinnecocks the 565th federally recognized tribe in the nation.
Today is a monumentous day. It's probably the most historic and significant day in Shinnecock history.
We're placing ourselves on equal footing with the United States government.
The recognition gives the 1,300-member tribe legitimacy and access to federal housing, education, and health care programs. The town of Southampton handed the tribe its support.
I just want you to know that we all want to be your partner in what this signifies.
But for some members, the celebration is bittersweet.
264 tribal members now who have passed on since we've been waiting this 32 years.
Tribal members say receiving the recognition means generations of Shinnecocks will never again have to question their Indian heritage. In Southampton, Tamani Woolley, BIOS 1 News.
And now back to Dominicans and Dr. Gates.
And when they think of the motherland, it's Spain that comes to mind, not Africa.
Spain comes to mind because their cultural framework was predominantly Spanish. Even in Haiti, one sees a strong French presence in architecture, dress, etc. But a French identity was rejected by the poor majority because of the revolution, the fact that many were recent migrants from Africa with African cultural traits fresh in their minds, and the abuse of the French overlords. This is not the case with many of the elite of Haiti who still speak French as well as Creole and go to France to educate themselves. Furthermore, the Dominican Republic is not just African descent, and the faces of the Dominican Republic don't only show predominantly African faces. The faces of the Dominican Republic span the gamut. Of course, we know Dr. Gates never took the time to travel through the interior of the Dominican Republic, so let's take a quick tour. As I said, the faces of the DR span the gamut, and while a strong indigenous heritage is not present in the culture of the mainstream, the memory of having indigenous roots is present in many Dominicans. In this sense, they are no different than many other populations that have gone mainstream, but still see themselves as Indian or mestizo. How is this any different than African Americans who constantly take courses in African languages, dances, etc. to try to rediscover their roots? Just because some Dominicans chose to focus on an indigenous past or a European one instead of an African one doesn't make their choice invalid. Many Dominicans are rediscovering their native past that ties them to the land they were born into, and they have the right to do so, as long as they do not forget their other roots as well.
And these attitudes have their roots in the earliest days of the colony. One of the first sugar plantations in the Americas was located here in Nagua. Hundreds of African slaves worked this plantation. But the Santo Domingo sugar industry didn't last long. Within just a century, the center of sugar production shifted to Brazil. To survive, the colonists abandoned the sugar plantations and turned to cattle ranching. That's when the unique racial identity of Dominicans began to evolve. Frank Moya Pons is one of the Dominican Republic's most eminent historians.
As cattle ranching became the dominant occupation, slaves had to be used as ranchers too. And there was very little difference between the master and the slave. They both were riding horses. They both were wearing machetes. So master-slave relation became quite different from the rest of the Caribbean. You know, slavery in plantation society works differently than slavery on cattle ranching society.
Less antagonism between
less
masters,
antagonism, and the behavior towards the slave was different from on the part of the masters.
After the collapse of the sugar industry, many white people left Santo Domingo. The colony increasingly depended on black people and mulattoes to fill the ranks of the army, the church, and the bureaucracy. They came to be known as whites of the land, and their loyalty was to the Spanish crown.
As being the oldest colony, there was this myth that this was the most Spanish of all colonies in the New World, despite the fact that the population did not look Spanish. But if you look into the official documents, most of them normally claim from the most Spanish and loyal city of Santo Domingo, or colony of Santo Domingo. That created, I would say, an ideological superstructure of Spanicity or Hispanicity, no matter how dark your skin was.
But not everyone embraced this putative Spanish identity. There are places in Santo Domingo where the African cultural legacy proudly survives. The followers of the Holy Spirit of the Congo drums of Via Maya are a unique Catholic brotherhood. They believe that the Holy Spirit miraculously gave their ancestors certain African musical instruments. Romain Mignet is the head of the brotherhood.
The brotherhood has been handed down from generation to generation. My great-grandmother, who was called Maximiliana Meniel, was 12 when she was named the Queen of the Brotherhood of the Holy Spirit of the Congos of Villa Maya. We've had this tradition for over 500 years.
This family has asked the Brotherhood to commemorate the 7th anniversary of a family member's death. UNESCO has declared the Brotherhood part of the oral patrimony of humanity, a protected status given to endangered cultural practices. Some Dominicans reject their African heritage and are shy about claiming a black identity. The reasons for this are rooted in their struggle for independence. On February 27, 1844, at Puerto del Conde, the Gate of the Count, patriots raised the flag of an independent Dominican Republic for the very first time. Professor Silvio Torres Salant of Syracuse University showed me around the Independence Park.
Silvio, paint a picture for me. What did it look like here on that day in 1844?
It was an old building which had political significance. It was here that people congregated to actually declare the official birth of the Dominican Republic.
The Dominicans, however, weren't declaring their independence from Spain, but from their island neighbor to the west, the new black country of Haiti. Haiti, founded in 1804 by former French slaves, occupied Santo Domingo in 1822. Haiti's 20-year occupation had a profound impact on Dominican national identity.
During those 22 years of Haitian unification, or occupation, depending on your point of view, did the national character of the eastern part of the island change?
National in terms of solidification of the idea of being a separate people. Yes, it evolved. You know, the Haitian government imposed French as the language of instruction. The Haitian government took particular actions against the church, economic actions against the Catholic Church. The people here were a Catholic people.
So the Haitian government was taxing the people and the institutions in the East.
That is correct.
And this angered everyone.
It angered everyone. So in terms of people, Dominicans recognizing themselves as a people, you could say, yes, this is a period when that could be seen as emerging distinctly.
They said, we're not like them, we are different people.
That's right.
Once they freed themselves from the Haitians, many Dominicans did their best to reject just about everything about them, their language, their culture, and to some extent, their color.
So this is George Washington, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton.
That's correct. In the center you have Juan Pablo Duarte, who is the intellectual architect, if you will, of Dominican nationhood.
So he's the theorist.
He's the theorist.
Okay. So are they all white guys?
He is a mulatto.
He doesn't look very mulatto in that statue.
No, he doesn't. And that reflects a tendency in the imaginary of the Dominican ruling elites who have this tendency to want to whiteify their heroes if their heroes are too black.
So they whitened the brother?
Yes.
Not only did they put him in marble, but they changed his features.
That is correct. And that actually is a way of pointing to the complexity of race relations and the racial experience of Dominicans.
Another disingenuous claim: the statues are in white marble, but the features are consistent with portraits done of Francisco del Rosario Sanchez, who was a mulatto with thinner features but markedly brown skin. No one ever claimed he looked European. Also something to consider: if anti-Haitianism was so strong as to supposedly choose white marble to make their forefathers supposedly white, and if their negrophobia was so terrible, how was it that their 22nd president was the son of a Haitian and a woman from St. Thomas and was quite black?
In the early 20th century, the Haitians came back, not as soldiers this time, but as desperate migrant workers. Most of them came during the United States occupation, which began in 1916. Part of Woodrow Wilson's policy of extending America's influence in its so-called backyard. The Americans appropriated large tracts of land to expand the profitable sugar industry. But the wages were so low that few Dominicans would do the work. So they imported tens of thousands of Haitians.
Plantation dehumanized Haitian workers. They were reduced to a condition of total destitution. It is there that Dominicans learned to see themselves as superior to Haitians.
In other words, the Haitians became the migrant workers, doing jobs that no self-respecting Dominican would do.
That is correct.
They became a new class.
It became a new class, and
But
because they were so homogeneous, so homogeneous in terms of their hue, in terms of their phenotype, then their blackness became a type of blackness which was different from that of Dominicans.
So all of a sudden, the primary opposition became between us and the Haitians.
That is true. That is true. So the Haitians then become a factor of Dominican identity.
Blackness became a Haitian trait and a negative term to many Dominicans. Some Dominicans stereotype Haitians in the same way that white people once stereotyped African Americans.
While colorism and class definitely came into play during this period, it wasn't the lead cause. Colorism and classism also play a role in Haiti as well as other English-speaking Caribbean islands, and the African-American population as well. Xenophobia and classism are the major issues, as the Cocolos and Afro-Americanos, also black, also lived in the Dominican Republic and were not harassed to the degree that Haitians were. It wasn't a color issue as much as a class and xenophobia issue, much like poor Mexican and Central American immigrant workers in the U.S., and much like many African Americans following their white counterparts and looking down on the cheap labor immigrating from down south, Haitians are looked as inferior, much like Mexicans are, but with the added antagonism from a historical memory of two countries' dislike of each other.
Racism and anti-Haitian feelings reinforce each other as if Haitians are a completely different and inferior race.
Is there a sense of the other's inferiority? Absolutely. There is a very strong antagonism between both, but it is not so different from many other countries that have had war between each other and hate each other's citizens. Colorism also comes into play, but is not unique to the Haitian-Dominican rivalry. Even in Haiti, the mulatto elite have both controlled and feared their darker-skinned brethren, as a historical animosity has existed all the way back to the Revolution, when Dessalines ordered mulattoes massacred. Yes, there is colorism in both countries, but the colorism has not led to the abuses that have occurred between these two countries. Their intense hatred for each other as nations with historical conflict has definitely played a major role. Colorism just gets exacerbated much worse when you add the Haitian-Dominican antagonism.
These beliefs were taught in schools and repeated through state propaganda until the late 60s. One man did more than anyone else to encourage these attitudes. The country's president between 1930 and 1961, General Rafael Leonidas Trujillo. A cruel and corrupt dictator, Trujillo's power over his people was absolute. Santo Domingo's National Museum of History and Geography holds his personal effects.
Wow, look at that. This was his uniform?
Yes, this was his formal uniform. Some of the things worth pointing out are the gold braids and the epaulets, also the belt where the sword will hang, which was a special and luxurious sword. These suits were made in France. They have a very French style.
Trujillo used anti-Haitian racism to help to forge a strong state after years of political chaos. He did everything he possibly could to claim that the Dominican Republic was actually a white nation, despite the fact that even he had Haitian ancestry.
This is the Gold's album, Trujillo. Was published in 1956. With the purpose to promote the Dominican Republic in the world. Yeah, the image of Dominican Republic was this.
All white, not even mulatto.
No.
No, blanco.
Don't exist.
Oh,
Yeah.
Jesus. Look at that. You would think it was Europe.
Yeah.
This would be an inaccurate claim as well. The album De Oro was a book that did portray the elite, mostly, but they were not all white. Many were just light-skinned mulattoes, as the following pictures all from the same book indicate.
In his ID, he put on white.
On his ID.
He's white.
But he was a mulatto.
Yeah.
Ah.
Like me.
Like you.
See, this is where the hypocrisy starts to kick in. If someone saw the lady walking in the U.S., they would have no problem considering her a white person, maybe ethnically Latin American or Eastern European. In fact, she is not darker than the people in the album. Trujillo was a monster. Yes, he hated black Haitians, but there is no evidence that he was in self-denial of his ancestry. Most of his ancestry was European. Him considering himself white is no different than many light-skinned African Americans considering themselves black.
You can see the rose cheeks and the pics and his photos, his makeup.
He has makeup.
The pictures and the photos.
He would powder his face?
Powder, yeah.
Lighten. Ah.
Yeah, it's white powder.
Ah.
Like, do you use?
My goodness. I'll be damned. Look at that.
Yeah.
Another entertaining inaccuracy that was used in this documentary. Trujillo was definitely Afro descent through his Haitian side. But to claim he was powdering himself to look white is false. Many actors and politicians at the time, including white people in the U.S., used powder to hide blemishes. Trujillo, a vain man, definitely would have used powder in his old age. But we have pictures of Trujillo in his younger years and he is still a light-skinned man. Furthermore, we have pictures of his Canarian descent father and his Haitian descent mother. Both were light-skinned as well. Trujillo would have easily been considered a white man by Latin American standards. There was no one-drop rule.
Trujillo's anti-Haitianism reached its apex here on the Massacre River, which divides the two countries. Trujillo turned on the Haitian migrants, claiming they were encroaching on the so-called purity of the Dominican motherland. His victims included Haitian immigrants, Dominicans of Haitian descent, and Dominican Haitian families. In October 1937, Trujillo issued an order for his troops to kill all the Haitians in the northwest part of the country. When his troops arrived, they closed the border. Even as the Haitians fled across the aptly named Massacre River, the troops brutally slaughtered them. In the end, approximately 15,000 Haitians lay dead.
A point of clarification is in order. The evidence that it wasn't just racial is that he never tried to purge the Cocolos or the Afro-Americanos of Samana. He only went after Haitians, and Trujillo did not go after Haitians around the entire country, but specifically the ones living in the border region. Further context is needed to understand the motivations of Trujillo. Trujillo was a despot. He was a dictator with an iron rule who came from an elite background. Trujillo had no qualms killing people, and especially people of the poor classes. Dominicans. He abused Dominicans constantly. How did the Parsley Massacre come about? It wasn't started because of some type of racial genocide mentality. It was started as a political move by a sociopath dictator with a mentality much like many kings of old, with little regard for their serfs. A man who had no regard for human life, especially for the poor, and especially for those from Haiti. 3 elements to explore: Trujillo, anti-Haitianism, and the situation in Haiti at the time. Trujillo was not a Dominican who was in denial of his Haitian roots. He was a descendant of the Haitian mulatto elite who had a history of conflict with their darker brethren in Haiti. Trujillo's father was the son of Canarian soldiers, but by his mother, Trujillo descended from the elite in Haiti. By his maternal grandmother, Trujillo was a descendant and relative of the highest offices in Haiti that occupied the Dominican territory between 1822 and 1844, and the families of the oligarchy of Port-au-Prince. One maternal great-grandfather of Trujillo was Haitian minister in the government of 1869 to 1874, and before that, of the provisional government which included Chevalier, also of Trujillo's family. His great-grandfather also was Minister of War and a member of the Council of Secretaries who ruled Haiti in 1874. Another relative, a colonel, arrived in the Dominican Republic in 1823 to join the occupation troops of Jean-Pierre Boyer. Another maternal grandfather was one of the highest-ranking Haitian officers. He was Major General, Duke of La Vega Real, commander of the Spanish part of the island occupied by Haiti and commander of Les Cayes in Haiti. Another of Trujillo's maternal great-grandfathers was a member of the Council of Notables of San Cristobal and was part of the group of Haitian mulatto families in Port-au-Prince, Croix des Bouquets and Mirabelet, who settled in San Cristobal between 1810 and 1830, and of which a multitude of well-to-do Dominican families descend. Trujillo was also related to a signatory to the Act of Independence of Haiti and governor of Gonaives. No, Trujillo wasn't in denial of his Haitian ancestry, but if his mind was anything like the mentalities of the Haitian mulatto elite of the time, he definitely would have not considered himself related to the poor Haitian black majority. He would have been proud of being a descendant of the mulatto elite that most Haitians called les blancs, the whites. This ancestry probably affected his mentality a lot more than just being Dominican. Many think that Trujillo acquired his anti-Haitianism all from growing up in the Dominican Republic. We may never know, but a few things to consider. Haiti has gone through many periods where the Haitian mulatto elite and the darker predominantly African descent majority have switched places in power, many times brutally. Many massacres of the mulatto elite entailed. It is quite possible that Trujillo's family inherited an extreme animosity for the darker black Haitian majority. Now, let's look at anti-Haitianism. The Dominican Republic was born out of a revolution against and occupying Haiti which involved many abuses of the population, something that has become ingrained in the Dominican psyche, much like Americans feel about the English during the colony. The difference is that, in this case, the English would still be neighbors and they would still be constantly disputing over territory. Rio Artobonito, now renamed Massacre River, was often the site of bloody conflict between the two nations. Let's be real, as much as there has been anti-Haitianism, there was also anti-Dominicanism on the Haitian side, but there was a big difference. The Dominican Republic occupies 2/3 of the island's land while having just 5 million inhabitants. In contrast, due to overpopulation, Haiti occupies the remaining 1/3 of the landmass and is very heavily settled with an estimated 500 persons per square mile. Furthermore, because of aggressive over-farming and deforestation, this has resulted in many Haitians being forced to settle lands that were too mountainous, too eroded, or too dry for rewarding farm production. The island nation suffers from one of the highest rates of deforestation in the world. Haiti and the Dominican Republic share the same island in the Caribbean, Hispaniola. Both countries are at the same latitude and, generally speaking, the same climatic conditions prevail, but the Dominican Republic has lush forests. Haiti is almost completely brown and bare.
A few weeks prior to the devastating 7.0 earthquake that hit Port-au-Prince on January 12th, we were in Haiti to report on the already dire environmental situation there.
As we approach these hills here, you'll be able to see the deforestation pretty well. As you can see out here how sparse the trees are, it's few and far between. For most Haitians, they live not even day to day, but mill to mill. The problem with trying to feed yourself, feed your family, you do it by whatever means you can, and if it's cutting down a tree to make charcoal, to sell that charcoal to get money to buy rice, then that's what you got to do.
We chartered a plane to fly high above the mountains of Haiti to see for ourselves what a country that is 97% deforested looks like. Relying almost exclusively on charcoal for cooking and heating, the Haitian people have literally picked their country apart.
And you can see the mountains here. There's really nothing to slow the water once it starts running off. They don't see the long-term effect of what it's done to Haiti. What is that long-term effect, do you think? Well, you know, the flooding we had last year, that's a long-term effect of it.
Even before the earthquake, deforestation has left Haiti dangerously vulnerable to natural disasters. Floods and mudslides have killed more than 10,000 people in the last 4 years. The erosion of the soil has crippled agriculture, destroyed much of the natural beauty of the country, and decimated its infrastructure. Roads are washed out faster than they can be rebuilt. Most Haitians live half their life in complete darkness. With very little electricity in the rural areas, which holds most of the country's population, people depend on charcoal for almost everything, from light to cooking to heat.
So this is their house. This is the way they live. You see this house is a small one and they 6 live here. Like this is the lamp, so we use it for lights and there's no electricity. Basically, we have no fridge, no nothing, no stove, so they use a charcoal. This is mud they use to make the house. Yeah, because of deforestation, we can have a lot of floods.
The essence of the ecological disaster that hit the country is that the agriculture that the Haitians have developed has been based on the notion of individual survival.
And in Haiti, individual survival means cutting down as many trees as you can for charcoal in order to feed your family. How much does it cost for the charcoal?
This is for 10 goods, less than 10 cents. It's a dirty business, and most of the people do not want to do it. They know it is bad for the environment, but there is nothing else they can do to make their life.
Until something can be done to lessen the poverty here and offer an alternative to charcoal, most believe the deforestation will not stop. The floods and mudslides will continue, and the infrastructure will not improve. We decided to take a trip to the interior of the country to see the damage for ourselves. Very few Haitians own cars, and the most common means of transportation outside of the cities are dilapidated pickup trucks called tap-taps, which apparently have no limit as to how many people can be squeezed into the back.
There's about 20-25 people in this little tap-tap.
This is a very dangerous way to travel, made even worse by the continuously washed out roads that can leave ruts up to 3 feet deep. Haitians are fed up, and most blame the government.
The government doesn't take care of the roads, and they don't care about repairing the roads. For example, you can see sometimes there are accidents and the cars fall down and so many people died.
Next, sorti la leg. Si qu'on est sous caméra pour tomber nous. Merde.
The narrow mountain passes of Haiti are particularly dangerous, and passengers who are lucky enough to survive accidents like this one can find themselves stranded for days.
The road is broken and the government don't do nothing with the road. That's the problem.
Haitians tend to believe that the problems with the roads is a result of government corruption and purposeful neglect of the rural areas. But even when the government does spend money to build new roads, they are often quickly destroyed by mudslides and flooding. Like this bridge that was badly damaged before it even had a chance to open.
Charcoal, a product in a country where nearly every tree has been cut down. 80% of Haiti's population lives in poverty. Many still depend on charcoal to cook. Delio says he gets his from the southern part of the country, and that if he could, he would sell something else.
I know I could sell other goods like rice or flowers, but I don't have enough money. I don't like seeing Haitian trees being cut, but I can only afford to buy charcoal.
By most estimates, Haiti has just 1% of its trees left, and these are disappearing quickly. Deforestation has been ongoing for centuries, and it intensified during the European colonization. But now the country is paying the price. The lack of trees worsens the impact of storms and hurricanes. Last year, Haiti was hit by 4 consecutive tropical storms. Entire cities were flooded. 800 people lost their lives. Trees provide natural protection from mudslides. Without them, communities have no protection. Yves-André Weinwright believes the solution is to plant trees and reforest Haiti's national parks. He says that this Caribbean nation paid a very high price for being the first black colony to gain independence from French colonizers.
We paid France a debt during more than a century. I guess it was 120 years we made paying a debt for the independence by cutting the trees.
Haiti provides a stark example of how environmental damage can affect populations. Deforestation that began under colonial rule has continued as a poor population struggles to find the basic necessities for life. The situation leaves the people here afraid of storms and hurricanes that they can't defend against. Above all, they're afraid of the rain.
You can blame that one on many factors, including the debt imposed by the French for Haiti's liberty, the embargo the country went through by slavery countries worried revolution would spread, and also by an infrastructure controlled by the elite that never attempted to improve the lifestyles of the poor, but instead always sought to exploit them for personal gain. Haiti's poor just swapped one group of masters for another. For the poor, the charcoal trade, however environmentally damaging, was the only way to make a living. Even today, 71% of all fuel consumed in Haiti is wood or charcoal. Every year, the country's 9 million and growing inhabitants burn a quantity of wood and charcoal equal to 30 million trees. That's 20 million more trees than Haiti grows yearly. The loss of trees and their roots has led to widespread erosion. Some 36 million tons of valuable topsoil is swept away yearly. This same problem existed in Haiti of the 1930s. Instead of staying on lands incapable of supporting them, many Haitians began to migrate onto Dominican soil where land hunger was low. While Haitians benefited by gaining farmland, Dominicans in the borderlands subsisted mostly on agriculture and benefited from the ease of exchange of goods with Haitian markets. Due to inadequate roadways connecting the borderlands to major cities, communication with Dominican markets was so limited that the small commercial surplus of the frontier slowly moved toward Haiti. This posed a possible threat to Trujillo's regime. Because of long-standing border disputes between the two nations, if large numbers of Haitian immigrants began to occupy the less densely populated Dominican borderlands, the Haitian government could have made a case for claiming part of the Dominican Republic's land. Additionally, loose borders allowed contraband to pass freely and without taxes between nations, thus depriving the Dominican Republic of tariff revenue. Furthermore, the Dominican government saw the loose borderlands as a liability in terms of the formation of revolutionary groups which could flee across the border with ease, while at the same time amassing both weapons and followers. The annihilation of an estimated 15,000 living within the Dominican border was clearly a direct order of Trujillo. Trujillo had made his intentions for the Haitian community clear in a short speech given at a dance held in his honor on October 2, 1937 in Dajabon, stating, "For some months, I have traveled and traversed the border in every sense of the word. I have seen, investigated, and inquired about the needs of the population. To the Dominicans who were complaining of the depredations by Haitians living among them, thefts of cattle, provisions, fruits, etc., and were thus prevented from enjoying in peace the products of their labor, I have responded, I will fix this, and we have already begun to remedy the situation. 300 Haitians are now dead in Banica. This remedy will continue." Trujillo obviously had no moral compass and was a heartless dictator, but this does not mean Dominicans were of the same ilk. There is a reason why they ultimately assassinated him. Despite attempts to blame Dominican citizens, it has been confirmed by U.S. sources that bullets from Krag rifles were found in Haitian bodies, and only Dominican soldiers had access to this type of rifle. Therefore, the Haitian massacre, which is still referred to as El Corte, the cutting, by Dominicans, was a calculated action on the part of Dominican dictator Trujillo to homogenize the furthest stretches of the country in order to bring the region into the social, political and economic fold. This was a clear culling of Haitians in the border. Trujillo wasn't as worried about those Haitians being black, as he was of them being Haitians occupying territory inside occupied the Dominican borderlands, which were constantly in dispute. This is quite clear in the brutal manner that was used to determine who would be killed or not. It wasn't skin color that determined the ultimate fate of the borderlanders. The massacre became known as the Parsley Massacre from the shibboleth that Trujillo had his soldiers apply to determine whether or not those living on the border were native Dominicans who spoke Spanish fluently. Soldiers would hold up a sprig of parsley, ask, "What is this?" and assume that those who could not pronounce the Spanish word for parsley, perejil, were Haitian. Both French and Haitian Creole speakers can have great difficulties with the alveolar tap or trill of the R in Spanish, pronouncing perejil. Instead, the ultimate determination of who got killed was clearly if the soldier believed the victim not to be a fluent Spanish speaker. Thereafter, Trujillo began to develop the borderlands to link them more closely with urban areas. These areas were modernized with the addition of modern hospitals, schools, political headquarters, military barracks and housing projects, as well as a highway to connect the borderlands to major cities. Additionally, after 1937, quotas restricted the number of Haitians permitted to enter the Dominican Republic, and a strict and often discriminatory border policy was enacted. Haitians continued to be deported and killed in southern frontier regions, while refugees died of exposure, malaria and influenza. Was this an outright act against all Haitians? No. In fact, Trujillo had strong ties with some of the mulatto elite ruling Haiti. He had ties to Haitian President Stenio Vincent, who received a lot of funding from Trujillo and was a fellow prop by the U.S. government at the time that supported dictators that were supposedly anti-communist. Now the relationship was one of power, with Trujillo being the stronger dictator. Many historians have theorized that the massacre may have been an attempt by Trujillo to goad Vincent into declaring war, and thus allowing Trujillo to conquer the entire island. Vincent actually tried covering up the massacre and used the guard to protect his palace instead of attempting to protect Haitian victims of these attacks. Again, Vincent was also a part of the mulatto elite and had very little care for the impoverished masses in his country. It is only when word got out of the massacres that Vincent made any attempt at action. In the end, American President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Vincent sought reparations of $750,000, of which $525,000, equivalent of $8,487,500 US dollars in 2012, was paid. Of this amount, $30 per victim. Only 2 cents were given to each survivor, due to corruption in the Haitian elite that kept most of it. Vincent actually lost power because of his failure to act on the massacre. His successor, Ali Lescott, was also a part of the mulatto elite and also had ties to Trujillo. Again, the Haitian mulatto elite were no friends to the impoverished black majority. Do understand that all mulattoes were not a part of the elite. Many were poor or middle class, but the majority of the elite were mulatto.